2, 1. And of course, we're asking everyone to mute for the time being. Thanks. 3, 2, 1.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Yeah, good evening, Dex. Loud and clear.
Okay, roger on that.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So we're about to commence. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ravindranath Goswami, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening's proceedings. Welcome to our distinguished panelists, who will be introduced shortly. Welcome to our distinguished participants in Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, as well as globally, that are viewing the live stream via YouTube and other means. Today's virtual panel discussion brings to a close two very significant series of events that would have been observed during the month of May. React Month celebrated internationally, with the year 2022 marking 60 years of service by the organization, and the NDPPM, or the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month, as declared by the Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and executed by several stakeholders led by the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, Udpm. REACT is the Radio Emergency Associated Communications Teams, a voluntary non-profit organization which provides assistance in times of emergencies and disasters, working closely with first responder organizations and partners. Not only in crisis times, the organization also provides assistance for public service projects, including cultural, sporting, and other activities in which communications and logistics are critical success factors. Radio communications is the mainstay of the organization's operations. REACT works closely with several stakeholders, some of whom are represented on the panel this evening. It is by no accident that React Month activities in Trinidad and Tobago and that of our NDPPM occur just before the official start of the Atlantic hurricane season. We, as global citizens, have a key role to play in disaster risk reduction, planning, strategizing, exercising, drilling, training, collaborating, cooperating, and having such discussions as we are about to have today are all part of our readiness in order to minimize the impact of the many hazards we face. Whether it's hurricanes, earthquakes, or other hazards, we must have an all hands on deck, all hazards, and all of society approach. Collaboration and cooperation among agencies and stakeholders are critical. Arising out of discussions with the NDPPM Secretariat, led by the CEO of the Udpm, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, and Operations Manager Dennis Marcel, REACT is pleased to partner with the Udpm in hosting today's virtual panel discussion, the role of radio communications in disaster prevention and preparedness. For participants, please note that you may send in questions to the panel a little later on. You can send them now if you wish, if you have questions, or wait a bit later on. And those questions are taken via SMS, text, or WhatsApp to the number 1-868-7473-228. So I'll seek to put that up on the screen. But again, it's 1-868-74-REACT. That's the number that we'll be taking your questions, if any, on. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists. We are very grateful for each panelist in agreeing to participate and give up their time and expertise to today's discussion. We have Paula Marie Granado, is a health, safety, and security and environment consultant, specialist emergency manager, and a certified lead auditor for the ISO 45001-2018 standard, as well as a certified trainer. She has over 26 years of experience as a radio operator and is the Vice President of the Safety Council in Trinidad and Tobago and former Vice President of the REACT Trinidad and Tobago Council. Alan Stewart is a disaster and emergency management professional. He has over 30 years of experience as a radio operator, is a past director of REACT Tobago, and is the director of the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, TEMA. Rennie King is a broadcast media professional. He has over 25 years of experience as a radio operator, and he is the CEO of RBS Broadcasting in St. Vincent. Dexter Haru is an information and communications technology professional. He has over 25 years of experience as a radio operator and is the network technician at YTEP and president of the Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society, TITAS. Tommy Chen is an information and communications technology professional. He has over 25 years of experience as a radio operator. He is the Chief Information Officer of the University of the West Indies, UWI, Open Campus, and Area E Director of the International Amateur Radio Union, Region 2. Jeff Chandler is an energy sector professional. He has over 25 years of experience as a radio operator and is a former Emergency Communications, or MCOMS, manager of the Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society, TITAS. David Drakes is a professional electrical engineer. He has over 13 years of experience as a radio operator, and he is the ICT director at the Water and Sewerage Authority, WASA. Dev Gosain is a professional educator. He has over 38 years of experience as a radio operator and is the vice principal of Naparima College and a trustee of the Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society, TITAS. Now, with all those numbers of years experience, did a quick calculation, and adding the number of years of radio experience alone, including that of your moderator, we have over 245 years of collective experience. So we trust that not insignificant experience will be reflected in our discussion today. So, ladies and gentlemen, we go straight into our topic this evening. And we have some questions that I will pose to our panelists and ask them to respond. And of course, you, our viewing participants, we encourage you, should you have any questions, please feel free to WhatsApp it to us. Again, the number is the area code 1-868-74-REACT. That's the easiest way to remember the number. That is 7473228. So I'll repeat that a little later on in the program. But let's get on with it. So, panelists, you're up. This is my turn to sit back and hear from you your contribution to the topic of discussion, the role of radio communications in disaster prevention and preparedness. That's our topic. So, the first question that I have for our panelists is, what is radio communications? Because we have persons in the audience and they're wondering, what is this radio communications about? What are we talking about? And why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness? So I will call upon Paula Marie Granado to take first bite at the question. Paula, over to you.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good evening to my fellow panelists, and good evening to those who are listening in and will be asking questions in the near future. Let me first of all preface my statement by saying that in speaking about radio communications this evening, I am speaking specifically to two-way radio communications as against broadcast communications. I would like to suggest that radio communications is first of all a discipline, and that discipline allows groups or individuals, or groups and individuals, to interface either on a constant basis or in need, when there's a need for constant communications. And those people or those individuals or groups are more than likely in different geographical locations. And the radio communications allows them to keep in touch through the use of a device, or should I say a tool, that holds two devices, a transmitter and a receiver. And radio communications is a very important or valuable asset to disaster communications. And of course, it should not at all be in any way devalued or understated when we speak about disasters and the role that radio operators and radio communicators play in disaster management. To get along quickly, I would like to suggest that in every phase of the disaster cycle, radio communication has its place to play. We could easily look and start from the early warning system, where radio communications may actually outplay some of the devices used to indicate early warning, things that we call early warning systems. Let us just say, for instance, those systems that are placed in the rivers. I think a person with a radio passing by a river can easily see rising waters quickly and communicate the fact that a river is about to breach, or that something can take place in the very near future, long before those devices that are actually placed there will receive that information and send it forward. Additionally, I think that in all aspects, as I said, of the communication cycle, of the disaster cycle, we have radio communications playing its part. Public information is very important in any disaster, and where there's a lack of public information coming forward, we can have gaps, and people can begin to fill those gaps with rumors. Therein is where fast, timely, and accurate radio communications can do its part. Emergency welfare systems are also assisted by radio communications in any disaster. And when I'm speaking to emergency communication systems, I'm speaking to things like shelter management and the logistical part of the things that have to be done during and after disasters. We also have medical care that has to be taken into consideration, and simple things like triaging at a location where there may be a major emergency, and determining the availability of hospitals and getting information from those locations to another location quickly through the use of two-way radio is very important. Security can also be handled through the use of two-way radio. Not to forget things like fire and other rescues during a major incident. Also, evacuation processes can be taken into consideration, and quick and accurate and fast information can be passed. And as we come down into the latter stages of recovery in the disaster cycle, public works, the determination of where heavy duty equipment may be at work, if you want to find equipment which is not necessarily seen or is available quickly, radio communications can give us that information. Determining and the analysis and determining the damage that has taken place can also be quickly relayed by the operator on the ground during any emergency. back to the place, or if it's a major emergency, the emergency operating center or the incident command room. And of course, all logistics can be assisted in getting things done during an emergency by the use of two-way radio communications. So two-way radio communications, as I said, as I started, is significant to disaster management, significant to disaster, to those who have to quickly create information and make decisions. The correct and fast information coming from two-way radio operators is always a great assistance and cannot be understated. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Excellent indeed, Paula Marie Granado. If I were to use a cricketing term, opening batsman, very well played, and noted your comparing and contrasting two-way radio communication against, let's say, broadcasting, and also taking us through the emergency management or the disaster management cycle. Very well indeed, an excellent contribution and perspective. So up next, so remember our audience who have just joined us, welcome. And we are on topic question number 1. And we have asked our panelists to consider what is radio communications and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness. So I now ask Alan Stewart for your contribution, sir.
First of all, let me say a very special good evening to, firstly, this distinguished panel. It's a privilege, it's my pleasure to be a part of this very important discussion on the issue of radio communications. I will first express that as a disaster manager myself, over the past years, I have seen the importance of telecommunications, and more so two-way radio communication, as an important element, or should I say the glue of, as it relates to telecommunications and disaster preparedness and prevention. Certainly, this is very important as we move along, and I want to highlight probably my own experience in that particular sphere. That I recalled in 2003, it was very important in terms of disaster preparedness that the island of Tobago looked towards decentralizing critical resources in the community. And that undertaking also included the involvement of two-way radio communication. I want to place on record, ladies and gentlemen, that in 2003, the whole concept of HF communications, and I believe some of the pundits here this evening will go deeper into some of these modes of communication. But it was one of the most happiest period in my life, especially getting into the issues and preparing for an unfortunate event. So I speak to 2003, whereby we would have seen the organization taking a step, which is back in those days was called NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency. As a part of what is called the community emergency kits, we decided that it was time to introduce a new kid on the block through the HF mode of communication. And for those of you who may not be acquainted with the acronym, speaking to high frequency communication. But it's important that I put this into context as I make this very noble example as to the issue as we speak to the topic of preparedness. In 2003, it was introduced that we wanted to go down the path of a technique called ENVIS. And at the very remote end of the island of Tobago, we decided to engage in a technique that was brought to me by another radio operator from the Amateur Radio Society, TITAS. He presented this paper to me on the subject of ENVIS, and I needed to sell it to the rest of the organization. I myself looked at the document and look at what he was proposing to the then NEMA to whether or not this can actually work. For those of you who are acquainted again of this particular acronym called ENVIS, Near Vertical Incident Skywave, I did my studies. It was established that this was more or less invented by the Germans military. So it piqued my interest naturally. And then we went into it. To cut a long story short, we implemented that technique of communications in 2003. And again, holding fast to our topic this evening on preparedness. By 2004, Tobago was hit devastatedly by two major events. In 2004, in September of that year, we were unfortunate to be hit by what is called the Hurricane Ivan. Tobago would have been impacted by the storm strength winds coming out of Ivan in 2004. And then later that year, by November, the November severe weather caused catastrophic impact on the island of Tobago, where for a second time, that part of the island, let me repeat that, Charlottesville, which is on the northeastern end of the island, was severely cut off for about 3 days. And therefore, it was the first time to my benefit, I saw the use of this technique and radio communication at a very difficult place when the entire island infrastructure was disrupted. That preparation of decentralizing telecommunications assets in that remote village came to our rescue and allowed for the first passage of radio or intelligence coming out of that village that was cut off for 3 days. And I recall it was utilized by a ham operator who was serving in that area. I think he was a member of the Customs and Excise Division, and he was serving in the Charlottesville area. Also, the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard major vessel led by Officer Poon, they would have utilized those communication assets in order to get communications back to the emergency operations center that Paula spoke about earlier on. So I think I will rest there for now. It would put it into context, the whole aspect of how important radio communications in the area of prevention and also preparation as a serious asset to the telecommunications and by wider the ICT network of communications. Thanks a lot. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Alan Stewart. Excellent contribution indeed. And you took us through the importance and practical instances where radio communications actually were important in real disaster situations in Tobago as well. So very good opening contribution as well. And just to note, we do have some questions coming in via SMS text already. Again, anyone who would like to text or WhatsApp questions to the panelists can do so at 1-868-74-REACT. So that's the number. All right, so up next for your opening comments on the topic question, and we welcome everyone who has joined since. We do have quite a few persons coming in via live stream, and certainly welcome each and every one of you. And we have asked the panelists the question, what is radio communications and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness? So at this time, I would like to ask Rennie King for your take on the question. So,
well, good evening, and let me see. It's a pleasure being here this evening. I'm hoping to learn from all my colleagues here this evening, but it's good to be here. And basically, radio communication is communicating from a group or individual to a wider audience, and it's two-way. You transmit and you can receive. Like Paula mentioned at first in her opening statement, she compared it to commercial radio. Commercial radio is just basically receiving. When dealing with amateur radio per se, we use a transceiver. Transceiver receive and transmit. When you press that PTT button, and for those of you who don't know what is a PTT button, press to talk button on your radio, you don't only reach one person. You can reach a group. You can reach an individual as well if it's just one person listening. But the chances are you're reaching a large group. So you can get one information to thousands of people by simply pressing one button and talking, saying what that information is and saying what that traffic is. For example, we recently had a volcanic eruption here in St. Vincent last month in early April. And what happened is that all communication systems were functioning until we start losing electricity in the areas that are affected. And what happened is that cell sites start going down, telephone systems start failing, because obviously most of the cell sites are sustained by backup power using batteries, some use generators. Of course, that lifespan for battery and diesel is short span. And after we have a long period of electricity failing in certain areas, not all areas was affected, we start losing communication. And that is where radio come in. Radio, you can have a battery. You don't necessarily need electricity to power it. And you can transmit. And you can get information from affected area to somebody who is willing to help, or if you just want to pass health and welfare information, that is the means for doing that. So we had that problem in some areas, and radio came in to play. So just to give you an example, and just to show you how two-way radio can be used in event of an emergency, and we'll discuss this maybe more as we go along, as it pertains to our local disaster here in St. Vincent, as it pertains to the La Soufrière volcano. But in summary, I just want to say that, and that is how, that is an example of how we can utilize two-way radio in an emergency.
excellent indeed there. Thank you very much, Rennie King. And yes, audience, Rennie is out of St. Vincent, and we have the benefit of him bringing information on a current incident that's happening on the island, and we will certainly hear from him a little bit later on some other matters. So thanks very much for your take on the topic question. So up next, and by the way, just to indicate, persons can ask questions via YouTube as well. So we have quite a large number of persons on YouTube. So if the SMS text or the WhatsApp is not convenient to you, you can ask your questions in the YouTube chat feature. We are monitoring that as well. So up next, we have Dexter Haru, and we are dealing with the topic question, what is radio communication and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness? Dexter Haru, over to you, sir.
Okay, greetings to you, Mr. Moderator, and also to my fellow panelists and the viewing and listening public at large. To me, radio communications is the sending of signals between devices with a human factor or without a human factor. That is what radio communication is to me and what it has come to. Just a brief history. Amateur radio and communications has a deep root in the CW mode, which is not necessarily a low power mode, but it's a signal mode that tends to penetrate where voice and SSB signals wouldn't go. Now, this mode is one of the most effective modes where getting signals around for emergency purposes. But stepping forward into the future, there has been many other modes that sort of emulate those tone burst sort of modes that would be beneficial and is beneficial to emergency communications. And like someone said, radio to radio and device to device sending signals to individuals or a group. And one example, I won't stay long, one example I want to use, it's not a local example, but for instance, there's this group called Skywarn in the United States. They have people called spotters that are trained in looking for anomalies in the sky with regards to when tornadoes may be forming, and they would call it in, and based on these spottings or spotters information, a lot of lives and properties are saved due to that type of emergency communication and getting the message to the people before the tornado or such hits or touches ground. Now there are these modes that I would have briefly mentioned, not by name. Further on, we would discuss them. So that's it for me. Back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Dexter Haru. Excellent indeed, the amateur radio perspective, and you mentioned CW, and coming up we do have a question from a member in the audience about CW, so very well indeed. Okay, so we are going along nicely, and welcome to all the persons who have joined our virtual panel discussion on the topic of the role of radio communications in disaster prevention and preparedness. And we are asking each of our panelists to take their turn on the question of what is radio communications and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness. So up next, we ask Tommy Chen for your contribution.
Okay, thank you, Robbie, and welcome to viewing audience as well as our panelists. I will take the view of radio communications is so ubiquitous and so part of modern living that sometimes we take it for granted. All right, for example, this device, everybody knows what this device is, right? It's a smartphone. This is a radio. So every individual on this planet who lives close to a developed part of the world has a radio device in their pocket or in their hands. But this device only communicates in very short distances. That is why you have cell towers all over the country. So the cell towers take your radio signals, relay it across the entire network here and then internationally. So imagine the day, and it has happened in the Caribbean several times over several years, where your entire cell phone network is wiped out. And this, it becomes a useless doorstop. You just can't communicate with anyone. So our other panelists talked about two-way radios, and this is an example of a two-way radio here. So this is a two-way radio that has a little more range than the cell phone, right? So this could go several miles. And with this, you can talk to an individual with an equivalent radio like this, right? And this is what is used by our first responders, our emergency coordinators, and the disaster management units to be able to do fairly close distance communications. And then our other panelists, Alan Stewart, talked about HF. And HF is a different type of radio which uses the ionosphere. And depending on the conditions of the atmosphere, you could talk to somebody around the world, depending on the frequencies that we have. So this reliance on communications, whether it's internet and satellite communications, to have all the functionality and features of modern living, can go in an instant, like what happened in Haiti during the earthquake, and more recently the hurricanes that passed through Dominica. And Ivan was mentioned. Ivan devastated Grenada. So Grenada was wiped out, and it relied, and the responders have to rely on radios like this and HF radios to do communications for simple things, just to know where people are, just to pass information on where things are. And that is why radio communication is so important. For modern responses to disasters, we have to have radio communications. And the most advanced and probably most expensive one is using satellite. So there are devices that look like this, that are satellite phones. And because the satellites are up there, chances of a hurricane or earthquake hitting those satellites are slim. And once you have a satellite phone, you probably have a very reliable device for communications in a disaster. So I'll stop there, moderator, because that should focus people's minds why radio communications is so important during a disaster. Thank you.
Excellent indeed, Tommy Chen, and certainly appreciate you showing some of the devices, starting with the ubiquitous cell phone that we all know and love and probably take for granted every day, and when it may not work, and showing the other devices and bringing all of that that we've been discussing so far together. So thank you very much. So we also have a few questions. We will take those questions towards a little bit later on some of the contributions from the panelists. Let's move right on next to our other panelist, Jeff Chandler, and your take on the question of what is radio communications and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness? Over to you.
Good evening, Mr. Goswami, and of course my other colleagues in the amateur radio fraternity. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. And of course, the topic of discussion is radios in a disaster. I would be brief because we need to be able to move on. But infrastructure dependence is one of the words I want you to familiarize yourself with. Because Tommy Chan brought out the cell phone a while ago. He spoke about satellite phones. And then there are telephones, regular telephones. These are infrastructure dependent. You have to have cell towers, you need to have satellites here and there and whatnot. The radio can be used without infrastructure. And so it is efficient. All you need to do is have your device, you string a piece of wire outside, and you could communicate with HF or VHF or UHF with ease, depending on how far you want to reach. If you want to reach from here to the US, you use a 20-meter HF frequency. If you want to reach from San Fernando to Port of Spain, you use a VHF frequency. So that infrastructure dependence is what will lick you up in a hurricane. And I have some experiences to share of when I was in Grenada during Ivan, and which will come in a little later. So back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Jeff Chandler. And we look forward to that experience coming up in terms of your Ivan and Grenada. And we also have the St. Vincent's experience to talk about, and some of the other things that our panelists have alluded to. So we have quite a wide audience in Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, and across the globe. We're getting some comments on YouTube, and we certainly appreciate each and every one of you participants on the live stream. Great to have each and every one of you. So up next, we have to take our first question, topic question of what is radio communications and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness? We now ask David Drakes for your take. Over to you, sir.
Right, good evening, colleagues. Thank you, and I'm indeed very happy to be part of this distinguished panel. I would like to approach this from a slightly different perspective. I am in full agreement with all of the comments made by my esteemed colleagues. From a policy perspective, however, there are a number of publications that I just wanted to refer to very briefly, starting with one published by the International Telecommunications Union entitled Telecommunications Save Lives. This is easily available online, and it's an excellent publication. Permit me just to quote one sentence from it, which says, "When disaster strikes, communication links are often disrupted. Yet for disaster relief workers, these links are essential in order to answer critical questions." I think Director Stewart from TEMA was alluding to that a few minutes ago in his discourse. Secondly, I just wanted to make another brief mention of another publication, this one by the World Radio Communications Conference out of Geneva in 2012, and it's entitled Radio Communication Resources for Early Warning, Disaster Mitigation and Relief Operations, which I would invite all parties to research. Thirdly, within Trinidad and Tobago, we have, within recent times, I think 2017 or thereabouts, prepared a draft National Emergency Communications Plan. And section 1.1, permit me to just read the first sentence, which says, "Reliable telecommunications are indispensable to the management of any emergency." And finally, the Telecommunications Authority, as of October 2020, recently revised the framework for the authorization of amateur radio services within Trinidad and Tobago. And for the first time, it makes special mention of emergency communications. And it recognizes the critical role that amateur radio operators in particular, the role or the function that they play in emergencies by having frequency agile equipment that is not dependent on any national network, as Tommy was making reference to a few minutes ago, and I think Rennie from St. Vincent also alluded to. So I just wanted to focus the discussion slightly. I'm in full concurrence with all that has been said before, and what I've tried to do here is just highlight a few publications that could further concretize and give credence to the role that radio communications plays in emergencies. Thank you, moderator.
Excellent indeed, David Drakes, and thanks for bringing in that policy framework perspective and talking about the ITU, WRC, as well as our local NECP collaboration between Udpm and the Telecom Authority, as well as the amateur radio framework. Indeed, all important factors in what we are discussing. So, we are doing pretty okay, and we are still on our first topic question: what is radio communications and why is it an important factor in disaster prevention and preparedness? So I now call upon, as we sometimes say, last but certainly not least, Dev Gosain for your take on the question. Over to you, Dev.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good evening to you and the panelists, very esteemed colleagues here, I must say, and the wider viewing audience. And I will focus my attention on, I'm not too sure how much we could prevent, especially good safety factors and whatnot, but more so in terms of preparedness. And, I would think that this thing was orchestrated, that as David came just before me and Jeff and Tommy and whatnot, they led straight into exactly what, I would like to talk about. We all know that in a disaster, information on the assessment and the requirements to save life, limb, and property must be made known to those agents who can provide the necessary relief. It is the assessment of the disaster, the coordination relief efforts that underscore the importance of radio communication for a disaster. Now, this is the important part. Going hand in hand with radio communication is the practitioner. The practitioner of radio communication must be the Swiss Army knife of radio communication when placed in the field of radio communication for a disaster. Having a well-equipped bouquet is nice, but if HF propagation is not favorable, or the antenna is broken, or your power supply is depleted or has failed, how can we communicate? So the necessary skills by the operator to assess, to adapt to the field is necessary in order to be effective. So my focus here is, while we, part of our preparedness, while we know about the hurricane season, we as communicators must develop our own personal skills so that we could deliver a product that, for which we are called upon to deliver, and deliver it very effectively. If this is not achieved, there will certainly be a disastrous radio communication system. That's it. Back to you.
Well said, Dev Gosain, indeed, and bringing everything together, and it's by no accident in terms of the scripting at all. So we do have a very distinguished panel of very experienced persons, each with their own perspective, and what we have heard on the first topic question really is a variety of perspectives, bringing together the importance of radio communications, what it is, and how it dovetails into our topic. So I will ask another question to our panelists. And of course, this time I will just ask, who would like to take the question. It doesn't necessarily have to be each of our panelists, but it may touch a nerve, or it might press on a button. And whichever panelist would like to take it would be fine. After these couple other questions, we'll go straight into the audience questions. And the audience, or participants coming in via social media, the YouTube, you can certainly ask questions on the live stream of the YouTube channel. And you can also WhatsApp or SMS text your question to 1-868-74-REACT. That's the number to WhatsApp or text your question. And we have a couple already. So the next question that we pose to our panelists, given what has been said, what are some of the systems? So we heard, things like NVIS and so on, and we have some questions in the chat. But what are some of the systems, solutions, strategies, capabilities, or technologies that's available that would have a positive impact on emergency communications? So panelists, who would like to take a stab at that question?
Don't mind going first this time, if you don't mind.
Sure, Dev Gosain, over to you.
And one of the reasons why I want to go first, because I want to give a little history on my own personal experience. In the early 90s, under Colonel Mutu, who headed NEMA, there was a definite thrust to decentralize disaster management and mitigation throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And let me take this opportunity to congratulate my very good friend, Alan Stewart, for showing us how very effective this model could be. What he's doing at TEMA and that whole decentralization process that we spoke about earlier on today. The San Fernando City's Corporation was the coordinator of the weekly stakeholder meetings consisting of everyone who has a role to play in disaster management and mitigation. Some of the stakeholders include police, fire, Ministry of Works, WASA, TNTEC, amateur radio operators, citizen operators, and the list goes on. These weekly meetings started from April and continued throughout the hurricane season. During the pre-season, that's before June 1st, there were training sessions and simulations. I even conducted field training for amateur radio operators and citizen operators on antenna construction and ways of optimizing our communication systems. A communication plan for the city was developed and tested. It was when the then director of telecommunications witnessed the operation. The regional corporations were given 9x5 call signs back then. And NEMA was given permission to have a repeater in the amateur radio VHF band. So the thing is that the decentralization, now I'm not knocking Udpm, I'm not knocking anybody, okay? But that model of decentralization, which I think Alan is a very good beneficiary of, being able to decentralize, and he mentioned that in his presentation. I think, by us decentralizing, that those are the systems that we need to put in place. Because right now, the regional bodies, I'm not too sure what sort of practice they have, what sort of training they have, how accurate they are, and so on. So that's for another day. Now, again, just to back up what we had said, the practitioner must first, again, we're going back to the practitioner now, there's another aspect of it. Acknowledge and accept his role as a radio communicator. Okay? He's not a disaster management person. He's a radio communicator. The practitioner should be very well trained in the practical side of radio communication. As like I said before, he's the Swiss Army knife of radio communications. He should have a very well equipped toolbox. And by that I mean he will have access to all modes and technologies, FM, SSB, digital voice, WinLink, bands, antennas for which his license allows. He must follow pre-designed communication plan, as this will clearly identify the following: the communication channels to be used for the stratified layers of communication, and the levels of priority for the various types of traffic in and out disaster area. Most importantly, he should recognize that he should use the best available technology. For example, if the internet is not disrupted, then that should be used with, say, digital voice, as opposed to trying to define nature by attempting HF contacts to the absence of propagation. Back to you, moderator.
Okay, very interesting take there on that question, Dev. A sort of a structural and strategic point of view, and also very good points that you're making, things for us to ponder on. And I could say to the panelists as well as our participants, we expect to have follow-up discussions and follow-up sessions like these to continue these conversations, because it may fork sectoral or particular conversations coming out of these discussions today. So very well, very thought-provoking points that you have made, Dev. And just to quickly respond to a question on the YouTube stream, someone asked, is it ENVIS or INVIS? We have expertise in our midst on the stream as well, and correctly answered, it's NVIS, Near Vertical Incidence Skywave. So very good questions, and we have a nice chat going on the live stream on YouTube indeed. So our second question that we have posed to the panelists and I will ask it again to see if there's anyone else who would like to take a stab at it. The question is, what are some of the systems, solutions, strategies, capabilities, or technologies available that would have a positive impact on emergency communications? Any of our panelists would like to take a turn at that question?
Well, I don't know if I can go now, but
yeah, sure. Rennie King, over to you.
I just like to take it up where Dev left off there, where he mentioned that if you have internet, utilize the internet before, using other means that might be difficult to communicate with. Amateur radio bands, depends on your frequency, depends on your mode of transmission, sometimes can be difficult if you are trying to pass information, and sometimes conditions are just not there if you're using HF. But I will use the example here in St. Vincent when we had the eruption. The eruption started the Friday, and the Saturday, I think it was the 9th, I personally start losing my backup because electricity was off for a period of time. My backup happened to be a solar powered system. All my solar panels were covered with ash. I'm in the green zone, by the way, and thick layers of ash was on my panel. Obviously, I can't go on a roof during an eruption to clean my panels, and my battery start depleting. However, I am utilizing various forms of communication. I use voice over IP. I use the system where I could talk to other people using my cell phone, using Zello. I jumped to Zello. And Robbie, I don't know if you well, obviously you recall, I start passing traffic to Trinidad using Zello. And that was my main way of communicating outside of St. Vincent. Because to be honest, I don't know what was going to happen. The day turned into night. Literally night. You couldn't see anything. The ash, you start feeling grains of sand, in your mouth. It's a terrible thing. You're inside your house, but this is happening to you. You can't breathe properly. You're feeling stifled. And I'm in the green zone, and I'm in my house. I'm not going outside, and I'm being affected. So I jumped to my Zello and I contacted the React group in Trinidad. And I was passing traffic sometimes 3-4 times a day. Each time there was an event, I would pass the necessary information because I just wanted somebody outside of St. Vincent to know what's happening, just in case everything should fail. And that was my way of communicating. Mind you, I had VHF and UHF communication still going inside of the island of St. Vincent, but to reach outside, I was relying on Zello. So I just thought, I mentioned that mode. So you can use digital mode, voice over IP, which is what I was using, which is an app that you can easily download on your cell phone, on your PC or Mac for whatever device. I think that they are all cross platform now. But I utilize that method of communication, voice over IP. It's a two-way kind of communication. It's basically radio, but on your device, using the internet. So for folks out there who are wondering, just to give you that summary of what Zello basically is, and you can research it. So I just thought I'd drop that information in to you, and it probably might spark some interest, but that was my major way of communicating outside of St. Vincent. Back to you, Robbie.
Indeed, and a very good point that's made there, Rennie, in terms of the modes and means of communications. And sometimes it may not be what we expect in a disaster. It can certainly be different non-traditional forms. And Zello, so persons in the audience wondering what that is, it's Zello, Zello. It's a voice over IP walkie-talkie app. No license is required, and you can download it. It's functional on any platform, and you can use it for yourself, your family, friends, and so on. And if you choose to download the application, we certainly invite you to join the React members channel on Zello. It's open to all communicators, and we welcome your participation as well. So on the React side, we say communications by any legal means necessary. So it's not only, it could be voice over IP internet, very good point made by Dev and Rennie as well. And we also heard some other technologies mentioned, such as WinLink and the other forms and modes of communication that helps in a disaster. So I have up next Paula Marie Granado with your take.
Thank you again, Mr. Moderator. I just want to mention React as an organization, and within React, we have different levels of operators. We are not all amateur radio operators, but there are amateur radio operators, and there are also operators who would be using VHF systems to operate off of. But the concept that I find really works for React is that concept of team. Why does it work so well? It works well because teams are located in different areas, and teams are made up, each team is made up of many people within an area, dispersed within the area, of course. And because of that, information flow can come rapidly from many spaces and constantly. So in the event of a disaster that causes problems with mobility and portability, we are easily available through our teams to receive information from locations that may be affected but cannot get other people in to give information that quickly. So our teams, to me, are a strength that allows for the quick updating of emergency information to regional corporations who need it, and also because teams are located in areas, the use of the different two modes of communications are easy, not to mention also, as Rennie just spoke about, what we are now using, Zello. So many people from different fraternities can get together and discuss what on the Zello channel. But strength mostly of the teams is that ability to get a lot of information from many people in different locations at this, as quickly and as accurately as possible. So that's my take on what systems work at this time, Mr. Moderator.
Excellent indeed. And that's embedded in communities concept, very important indeed, and also crowdsourcing, quick, the ability to get situation reports live and direct that's reliable as well. Okay, excellent indeed. So I have up next Alan Stewart with your take, and then we'll move to the next question. So Alan Stewart.
My apologies if my mic was causing any disturbance. I just recognized it was hot. Nevertheless, I think I will jump off on the last statement that you made about crowdsourcing. I recalled in 2012, I was part of one of the CDMA's conference held in Jamaica. And a number of radio enthusiasts, more so out of the amateur fraternity, one of the day's sessions, they had a demonstration booth involved at that conference. And I was ears to the discussions among a number of radio operators, radio enthusiasts in the amateur fraternity. I want to make three very important points as we speak to the issues of systems. What are some of the systems? I found it very awkwardly important to make an intervention as a disaster manager who had evolved out of telecommunications, but was serving at a station or at a level where it involved a multiplicity of modes. And this is where the ICT, I recall in 2015, that the World Telecommunications Union would have recognized telecommunications and ICU assets or ICT assets as becoming a very important development as the world evolves. I am saying this to make a comparison and also to engage some of our theories and ideas and biases of those of us who are in the radio fraternity. Back in 2012, I had to intervene and say, listen, gentlemen, there was a strong argument taking place that they felt that disaster management was not recognizing the importance of radio communications and what it offers. And you know, one will make the point about how porous or the lack of robustness that these technologies offer, and sometimes the last thing that goes down is the amateur station or the radio communication, as Jeff rightly said, can stand on its own. And that's important. So I had to make the point that too many people, because I have the same challenge at my institution where sometimes the ICT see themselves separated apart from the telecommunication aspect. And I said, no, ICT just doesn't mean computers, but it speaks to communication and information, movement of information through technology. And it allows for the entire suite. And it's important that today that we use these platforms to allow the biases from either side to be harmonized. And that is important. Now, one of the things that I want to mention is that I remember as early as 2014, I have been started receiving the names like Mr. Zello and things like that. But the whole idea of voice over IP internet protocol became something that I got exposed to in 2005 in Canada at the World Disaster Conference. And I was intrigued. I remember saying sometimes to my colleagues back here, I said, even TSTT did not know anything about, and TSTT is the local telecommunications giant in the country that is responsible for our phones network. And I said, they don't even know about voice over IP internet protocol, and whereby you can use the internet to serve both video and also data and voice, of course. And to me, that started working well for us during 2005 going forward. Let me summarize by saying that to me, these assets is very important, but we have to understand mostly the limitation that each of these variances bring to the table. Today, at the Emergency Operations Center, where we are, we have recognized the very important role that HF communication plays. And the pundits will argue, you know, that's the last end of it, the last man standing. And I agree. But one of the things I have observed is the shortcomings of the HF communications and the challenge. The telecommunications center at the Emergency Operations Center is an annex to the operations room. And sometimes you hear the annoying noise, you hear the challenges that they are trying to contact a station and so forth. And it brings me to my final point, and that is ALE. ALE is an acronym that stands for Automatic Link Establishment. And it is because of where I sit, I am one of the persons who feel that I have a stake to ensure that we bolster the HF system with ALE. The trial and error, it's my argument over the years that for us in the disaster management cycle, we have depended too much on voluntarism. And as a result of depending on voluntarism, you have hardly seen in the disaster management arena in the area of the telecommunications or HF communications, where you have what you may consider solid state or professional military grade service radios into the picture. The automatic link establishment is one of the things that we have to push to take the guesswork out of finding frequencies on the HF band that would allow for that potency in communications. And it is the next step. It's where we have to alert our Caribbean Telecommunications Union in Trinidad and Tobago here. I have already made the signal to our colleagues at TAT, which is the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. We have already started sending the signal to that, we are now doing the National Disaster Plan or revalidating that plan. And therefore, ALE has to play an important role to give that boost to that mode of communication, and where frequencies can be selected automatically. There is this notion that, these things will break down during times of disaster, but the world has understood that, and they have made provisions and are continually making provisions for stability in all of the areas of telecommunication modes. Be it cell sites, they understand the importance of these things, allowing people, and I started off by speaking about crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing has become very, very important. In 2013, they recognized that. The International Red Cross understood that importance of, and I looked at the area to put balloons over balloons over Puerto Rico. The Google provided that feature because they understood how important it was for persons to know what's going on in the country that is affected. And certainly, I want to rest here now, but I just thought I will throw that spark into the discussion on ALE and all those other modes that can help. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Back to you.
Thank you, Alan Stewart, for your contribution introducing or extending the discussion on crowdsourcing and some of the other technologies such as ALE and the importance thereof for us to consider as far as options for communications. So up next, we have Tommy Chen. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow on Alan's convergence of ICT and radio communications. In the International Amateur Radio Union, of which I'm a member of the executive committee, within the last couple of years, we have supported a project that was started by the ITU, and especially in this part of the world, which is the Americas, this hemisphere. And it's a convergence of technologies. You talk about email. Email is ubiquitous for us to do business. And email is a very efficient form of communication, meaning that if you have to send a list of things that you need, if you are at a location and need stuff, it's probably much more efficient to send it as a text file in an email rather than using voice and communicating that and tying up a channel, whatever channel is available, whether it's amateur radio channel or one of the channels used for responders. So, the IRU has supported a technology that has been implemented throughout the Caribbean, and the last implementation was in Dominica. So, since the hurricane in Dominica, those were the amateurs that survived even during the broadcast stations going down for a little while. The ITU together with IRU supported the installation of WinLink, All right, what WinLink is? WinLink is email technology. That's basically what it is, but email done so that you can use whatever is available to transmit that email. So you can use amateur radio, HF links to remotely to another country, or VHF links, UHF links to local in your own country. So if the entire infrastructure is wiped out in a particular country, with HF, VHF radios, and computers that have WinLink installed on them, you can send email in that network and be able to send your message either locally or internationally to all the connected nodes within the WinLink network. So WinLink is a technology I think we should get familiarized with it. And in particular, WinLink was chosen by the ITU to install that technology in the disaster management units throughout the Caribbean. So right now, Trinidad and Tobago is a little behind in that project, but there are several Caribbean countries and especially in Central America that have permanent WinLink nodes that will be able to take traffic from anywhere in the Caribbean and relay that through the internet too, so that an individual could just use your email and you'll be able to contact your contacts by email without having and knowing anything more than the email address of the destination. So I'll pass that to you, moderator.
Excellent indeed, Tommy Chen, discussing in a bit of detail the WinLink project and the importance of that in terms of improving our capability for amateur radio communication and using email over amateur radio. So I think we have pretty much discussed quite a lot of the solutions and technologies that's available to us. So I would like to move on to the next question, or the last question I have for the panelists, and then we will look at some of the questions that the participants have asked via text messages, SMS, and YouTube. Suffice to say that some of these questions, as they have been posted, the panelists have been answering those questions. So when it comes to those questions, I will look at perhaps the ones that the panelists did not yet tackle in their various presentations. So panelists, and I think there are at least two persons we'd like to hear from, one in respect of St. Vincent and one in respect of Grenada, on this next question. And the question is, discuss your experience in an emergency or disaster situation or drill, and to what extent radio communications played a key role. Who would like to take a stab at that? Okay, so Jeff Chandler, over to you.
Good evening once again, and of course, those of you who are listening via the YouTube and Facebook and so on. This question is, discuss your experience in an emergency or disaster situation or drill, and what extent is radio communications was a critical element and played a key role. Ivan happened in September of 2004. Scarlet Ibis happened in Trinidad and Tobago in 2009. TTAS as an organization held several simulations, let's say after 2000 or during 2000 coming forward. And the Honorable Prime Minister in Trinidad visited Grenada in 2004. And when he returned to Trinidad, he said to us, we have to help Grenada. And those words sank into me, and I started to think of what I could do. And the Saturday after I was over there, and that resulted in a 3-month secondment to Grenada after Hurricane Ivan. And my tasks were several tasks. The Trinidad and Tobago military was deployed over there, and they had several challenges. Challenges of movement, forward deployment, and so on. And they called on the radio operator to set up radio stations, HF radio stations, to do the job so that the military work became easier. They no longer had to operate out of one base, but they started operating out of a second base, a third base, a fourth base, a fifth base, and I think we reached up to seven bases in the whole of the island. Another thing I was asked to do, cell phones in Grenada were functioning sporadically, but there was no power to power the cell phones. So what I did was get batteries, give it to the scouts. The neighborhood would bring their cell phones to the scouts to charge. Once the batteries were depleted, I would replace it. And so the community were able to use whatever cell phones they could to contact one another. The fisheries, I did an assessment of the fishing telecommunications, the amateur radio operators, and of course the police had their infrastructure dependent communications destroyed, so that the radio communication, which was without any infrastructure, was the main form of communications up and down all of Grenada, and even operating the controls in Trinidad, reporting at the end of the day what they did back to Trinidad, Defense Force Headquarters. So that was the size of it. Let me tell you about scarlet ibis that happened in 2009. One of the important things in scarlet ibis exercise was a fire on the outskirts of the airport. This was a drill, a simulation. And the Udpm wanted to see the response of the airport authority to a fire on their outskirts. So they started this big blaze, massive blaze. They didn't tell the airport anything. The airport sent two persons down to see what it is going on. When they reached, real fire. And of course, injured people in the bush. And that left an impression on me. How do you resolve this in the time that is given? Similar to what we are experiencing here. And of course, my final experience was in that bridge in Toco, on the way to Toco. If you look on my QRZ page, you would see in the bush an NVIS antenna. And that was used for communications of that exercise. It was a water rescue exercise. The fire services rescue team went out and rescued some fishermen and so on and so on and so on in the adjoining river out in Toco. And I was able to set up a communications in the darkness and have it functioning and reporting back to Udpm headquarters. So those were some of the highlights. And of course in Faham, which was another drill. I don't know if Mr. Stewart would recognize this, but at that time I was working in White Cell at the Udpm. And then a report came that we had to vacate the building. The strategy was to hand over control to Tobago. And we would relocate to that building, Riverside Plaza. Radios, computers, everything that you had to operationalize in the ODPM's office had to be relocated to Riverside Plaza. And of course, we did it. Tobago took control of the operational activities. And when we finished setup, I remember how many hours it took to get up there to set up equipment and whatnot. Take back control of the activity. And those are the things that caused me to develop as an MCOMS specialist. Back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Jeff Chandler. And what a bit of experience you shared, quite a bit, from Ivan in Grenada to the Faham to the Scarlet Ibis, and so on. So many of the actual emergencies that you have had to respond to, as well as exercises or drills, and quite a wealth of information that you have shared with us. So given the time, in the interest of time, I will ask if we, on the third question that we have posed to the panelists, and that question is, discuss your experience in an emergency or disaster situation or drill, and to what extent radio communications played a key role. So maybe I could ask for one more panelist contributor before we go to the questions from our participants. So would any other panelists like to talk about the experience in actual emergencies or drills?
If no other one, maybe I could just share very recent.
Sure, Alan Stewart, over to you.
Yeah, allow me to share a very recent event, and this had to do with the recent storm that impacted Tobago called Karen. You already recall that was just about 2 years ago. Something dreadful happened just following the passage of the storm, whereby immediately after the passage of Karen, it was cited that a number of residential properties, commercial properties, institutions of the state were disrupted as a result of the passage of Karen. There was adverse flooding, or should I describe it as flash flooding, in the streets of Scarborough, where banks, I think that was the last time that Scotiabank operated after being hit so many times by these hydrometeorological events. The Karen was the last, and being lashed by a woman so badly, they decided to take their business out of Scarborough once and for all. But more importantly, to the point I wish to make mention to, or to visit, has to do with what happened in the aftermath. Immediately in the aftermath of Karen, the then chief secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly had requested of me very early that morning, just after 6 a.m., that he needed to do a tour of the island, and he wanted me to join him on that tour. By the time we were able to jump forward for the purpose of time, get going with the tour, he was notified by our command structure that the Honorable Stuart Young, which was the Minister of National Security, was paying a visit to Tobago as well, to do a tour via helicopter. And therefore, he wanted to reach on the ground with the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly to join him on that tour. Reason being, a number of state agencies were also affected. The port of Scarborough was heavily inundated with floodwater and debris and required a massive cleanup drive. Also, the customs and excise that were housed on one of the major street, Carrington Street or Customs Street, was actually inundated, and a number of their assets and also people's property were also damaged in the sheds that were bearing some of those goods and freights that were sent in from, persons sending in from abroad. So therefore, it became important that the minister make that type of visit to Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, in the midst of it, there was a disruption in Trinidad on one of our major telecommunications platform, that of TSTT, and excuse for calling the name of the service provider on this channel. But during the aftermath of cleaning in Trinidad, one of their cables was accidentally, which was serving Tobago and other areas, were disrupted, and therefore the entire network telephone services of B-Mobile fell flat on the ground. There were no communications by phone. So just imagine in that moment, we are about to reach the minister, we are about to collaborate, and there is no communication link. Fortunately for us, we had just acquired a new system on the UHF band with a Motorola product that was just being put out by one of the telecommunication service providers. And we were utilizing those radios. That radio or radios came to our advantage and our rescue, where we were able to communicate with the helicopter because there were no phone contacts. The minister trying to call the chief secretary in the convoy trying to get in touch with his counterpart. And therefore, radio communication played a very important role, utilizing a string of UHF infrastructure that was put up very fresh and was tested. We were only using the radios for test purposes, and the telecommunications service provider used TEMA as the guinea pig, and there was Karen, or there was this storm that caused an impact. And in the aftermath, post of it, immediately, less than 24 hours afterwards, you had this serious disruption. And I tell you, colleagues, that the UHF network stood up quite admirably, and therefore provided handsomely the type of communication and took embarrassment out of us, because for 5 hours, that network on the B-Mobile, I could tell you a short story that, our redundancy of the other platform was taken away from us because, the authorities couldn't see the reason why TEMA will have B-Mobile and also Digicel systems, and one was discontinued. But I tell you, the radio communication saved the day, saved us embarrassment, allow the chief secretary and the minister to be able to communicate, and held our way while we were able to do the island tours and to see the areas that were affected during the aftermath of Karen when it impacted Tobago. So that's a recent story that I can share. Thank you for allowing me. Control, back to you.
Thank you very much, Alan Stewart. And what a vivid scenario painted for us in a real situation with the onslaught of Karen, and when infrastructure went down, the importance of radio in saving the day, as it were. And I seem to remember that quite well, because I think we were able to arrange some helicopter lifts and coordinate through that same radio communication. So very important contribution indeed. All right, so in the interest of time, I think we should now look to take some of the questions from our participants. I'm sure we will not be able to address all of them, but I suspect quite a few of the comments and questions on the YouTube channel, as well as the SMS SMS and WhatsApp messages have actually been answered by the participants as you were contributing, almost as though you were anticipating some of these questions. So I will just pick out a couple of the questions that have been asked, and I can ask the panelists who would like to respond to these questions to give a quick answer to some of these questions. So the first one that we have is CW or Morse code hard? Question, is CW or Morse code hard? And I see Dexter smiling, I see Dev smiling, I see Tommy smiling. Everyone is smiling. So who would like to take a quick stab at that question? And this is sent in by a young operator actually out of Dominica. So is CW or Morse code hard? Who would like to take a quick stab? Okay, Dev, over to you.
I just wanted to unmute. All right. Let me just tell you how I did the exam, okay? What makes CW difficult, especially like in Trinidad at the time when we had to get a license, we could have set the date for our exam. Now, being involved in education, who here likes to write an exam? Show by raise of hands. We don't, okay? We don't. So the problem with being certified as a ham radio operator in the era that I got my license, when Morse code was mandatory, you know, we will want to defer that exam till whenever, okay? So what I did, my own personal experience, is that I decided before I learned a scrap of Morse code, I went to the telecommunication division and I made an appointment for my examination. So I told the guy I wanted to do it in the next 3 weeks. He said, well, you're out of luck because I'll be going on vacation in the next 2 weeks. I said, okay, well, thank you very much. Set me up for the day before you go for the vacation. So I came home. I never knew a scrap of code. And now, I mean, I had something called a MFJ Morse tutor or something like that will generate random code for you. You set the speed. I set it at 20 words a minute, and I had 2 weeks to learn Morse code. Now, there are a lot of software that you could have on your smartphone. You could download, they have YouTube videos, and a whole host of programs to learn your code. But I would advise you, especially for examination and for your own self-teaching, set yourself goals. Say by the end of June or the end of July, I want to be code proficient. And you only break it up in steps. If you want to be effective at it, set yourself goals. And I think I was sending and receiving at 20 words a minute in 2 weeks.
Excellent response there, indeed, Dev Gosain. All right, so we move to the next question. And the question goes like this. How does a radio operator get a message to a DMU, and DMU would mean Disaster Management Unit, or the Udpm, given the internet is down and phones aren't working? So I say again the question, how does a radio operator get a message to the Disaster Management Unit of the Regional Corporation or the Udpm when internet is down and phones are down? Who would like to take that question?
If I may, moderator.
Sure, David Ricks, over to you.
Right, so I think one of the fortunate things about the disaster management units at most of the regional corporations is that they have radio operators, many of whom are amateur radio operators. The Udpm, along with the DMUs at the regional corporations, all have amateur stations or operators located at each end. And therefore, it would be a fairly simple endeavor for the both parties to communicate, because they would have amateur radio as the common platform between the two entities.
Excellent response indeed. Thank you very much, David Ricks. And there's a follow-on question. How often are radio communications tested? So would anyone like to take that question? How often are radio communications tested?
I would like to.
Sure, Tommy Chen, over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone again. Radio communication is tested by having exercises on a regular basis. So in the Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society, what we have these things that are called nets. So it's short for networks, but what it is, it's that radio operators, one of the radio operators called a controller, and during a net, the controller takes check-ins from various operators throughout the geographically throughout the network, and it's in those nets that is very common throughout amateur radio, not only in Trinidad but right throughout the Caribbean, right throughout the world. That is the opportunity for persons to ensure that the equipment is working properly, so that when they check into the net, they can relay communications information to the net controller fairly efficiently. So it exercises both the physical equipment of the operators as well as the protocols and passing information between operators and the controller of that channel. So having regular exercises. So example, in the Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society, what there is a net that is on Sundays for VHF on the VHF repeaters, and every day there's a net on HF frequencies, which is called the Hummingbird net, which lasts about 2 hours from 4 p.m. every day, right? And there are other types of nets throughout the Caribbean. That is, the net controllers are Caribbean wide, and it's in these nets that the radio amateurs ensure the equipment are fully operational, and also to pass information and practice the protocol of message handling. So that is how the equipment is exercised, and people also exercise themselves. Back to you, moderator.
Okay, excellent response there, Tommy Chen. So our next question really is a statement that was made. So the statement goes, HF digital modes such as PSK, RTTY could be more efficient and practical over CW comms. So I say again, HF digital modes such as PSK, RTTY, that's RTTY, could be more efficient and practical over CW comms. Who would like to take that? Okay, Dev Gosain, over to you.
All right. That is a fallacy. PSK and RTTY would need some sort of computer to be able to decode it. With CW, all you need is a spark gap, the simplest of transmitters, and a single tube, and you could be able to send and receive information. So PSK, RTTY, FT8, Olivia, all these modes need some computer to decode it. So the main point here is the advantage of CW is that with a proficient CW operator, you don't need any computer. As a matter of fact, if you were, for example, trapped in an earthquake and all you have is a piece of rock, you could actually tap out SOS, and somebody will hear you. Okay? And if you have somebody proficient in CW on the top side, you could actually tell them how deep you are, where you are located. So CW is much more it's reliable in times of disaster.
Okay, excellent indeed response there, Dev Gosain. So here's another question. Will you say that UHF is the way to go now? Any takers?
I will. I'll take that question.
Sure, Tommy Chen, over to you.
Well, the one of the joys of being an amateur radio operator is that you have experienced a wide range of frequencies. The entire spectrum of RF is available to you. So in your experimentation, you'll see the strengths and weaknesses of the frequencies as well as the modes. But this particular question is talking about frequency. So VHF, this is a VHF radio, right? It has its advantages. FM, if you use FM, the quality of the audio is very good. But the range of this radio is a few miles, unless you have a repeater. With a repeater, it could cover an entire country. So it depends on what the use case is and what you want to achieve. If you all you want to do is to be able to talk to this in short distances and to always hit a repeater, that will satisfy you as an amateur radio operator. But if you want to go beyond the range of UHF frequencies, you'll need to move to HF and those frequencies where you are not limited by this frequency. So that's my answer.
Excellent indeed, Tommy Chen. Thank you.
I just add to that, Robbie, for the mind.
Sure, Dev Gosain, over to you.
Just to give it a spin on what it is. That's like saying, I think wearing a short pants is the best piece of attire I could own. So I don't need to have no boxers. I don't need to have any long pants. I don't need to have any track pants. Each attire has its specific place in our way or the role of life. So too, and this is why in amateur radio, you are given, it's like golf. You cannot, every single club in your bag has a certain application. So too in ham radio, hams are given multiple parts of the radio frequency spectrum so that they could now depend, and this is why I said in my presentation, that the radio communicator is the Swiss Army knife of telecommunication. You have to find, just like Stephen Ames or Tiger Woods, will know the right club to use for the right shot. So too, as a ham radio operator, or as a radio communicator, you will use different portions of the spectrum for different applications.
Excellent indeed, dear Dev Gosain. And I like your reference and an analogy in explaining, everything has its purpose. And as we say sometimes, everything is just another tool in the toolkit. So along those lines, we did have some questions asking about Zello. Will that be appropriate in an emergency and disaster? And very good points indeed. But as we say, it's another tool in the toolkit to be utilized as and when required. As Rennie King would have said earlier, that it was in fact utilized at a point in time when it was necessary so to do. So another question again coming in. Okay, so I see that question got retracted. All right, so we'll, but it was a great question. So I'm not sure why the person retracted the question. It had to do with interoperability. So let's go to some of the other questions. What is the panel's opinion of having a regional amateur radio response team trained and ready to respond to regional disasters? And how can we develop such? So I say again, what is the panel's opinion on having a regional amateur radio response team trained and ready to respond in regional disasters? And how can we develop such? Okay, Jeff Chandler, over to you.
The Caribbean Amateur Radio Union, CAMRU, was formed precisely for that. I see Rennie is on the channel, and we were to have a discussion on this, but that discussion hasn't taken place as yet. But there are benefits to be had. creating a cadre of Swiss Army knife operators to go through the Caribbean.
I'd like to add to that, if you don't mind.
Sure, Dev Gosine, over to you.
There is actually something of sort, I should say. There is something called the Caribbean Emergency and Weather Net. That net has been meeting since I got my license 38 years ago at 6:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. without fail on the 80-meter band, okay? And every single time, so the Caribbean, the hams in the Caribbean actually meet presently to share information in times of disaster and so on. The net is activated for long, long periods. Matter of fact, even for Renee's little mishap in his country, the disaster there, that net was actually, it was operational on 80 meters and on 40 meters. So hams throughout the Caribbean are actually working with each other to get things going. And Rennie will know that I myself had started something on digital voice, which unfortunately, because of a server issue, it was migrated, and within the next month or so, the network will be back up again, okay? Again, it's to foster all these things. The whole idea is that before we start meeting as a group and whatever, we need to have the infrastructures in place. And when the infrastructure in place, it's like, you know, you want to meet. Let's say we want to meet. This meeting is a good example. So the moderator set up a Zoom link so we can all join a link. So these are I think we have to understand the logistics of forming a group. We have to find a place that we can call home. And then we can invite people to our home.
Excellent indeed. So we had two really good responses there from Tommy Chan, Jeff Dev as well, and mentioning some of the regional nets that's available, such as the DV Caribbean effort. And to add as well, there's also the Echolink version of such efforts. Certainly one Caribbean strong, as we say. So very good efforts, ladies and gentlemen. So another question that we have is, what do you think is needed to get new and young operators? Who will take that?
I don't know if I can slip in here.
Sure, Rennie, over to you.
Okay, I'll just speak again based on a recent mishap as it pertains to the volcano. What happened is that a lot of folks from the danger zone or the red zone, orange zone, came down to the green zone. Places like Kingstown, the capital, the southern portion of the island mainly. And what happened is that these shelters they didn't contain just people of a specific age. You have the young, the old, you know, a large age gap from age 1 to, who knows, probably close to 100. This include children who are currently in school. And what I had to do, I was called upon by the Ministry of Education to go into some of these shelters and tell the children more about amateur radio. And this is what the main idea behind of this is, to educate the children, let them know the uses, what are the reasons for using amateur radio as it relates to disaster, which is something what we are doing here. And the responses that came from the children was amazing. I mean, someone asking question like, okay, how do you get your license now? Because based on what I told them and I did certain demonstration with them, they were overwhelmed and wanted to be part of the Amateur Radio Society because they see the need for it. So if we educate the children, let them know the uses, because just hearing amateur radio and don't know you're not demonstrating to them what it is, they will never know. So you have to show them. You have to take your radios. I took my radios into the shelter. I took my antennas. I took my go kit, my emergency kit into the shelter. My batteries, my backup batteries. I use some UPS batteries, and I wire them together using a 12-volt parallel system to get my amperage up. And I take that along, and they all came to see at the end of the presentation, to have a closer look and to actually feel equipment and to see the equipment and to actually want to be a part of the equipment, to use it, So I think we need to educate the younger heads. Our education in general is important. Not just talk about amateur radio, but exactly what we're doing here. Push it to the wider community. Let's not just confine it to amateur operators, but others out there who will have the interest and will eventually spark the interest.
Okay, Rennie, excellent response, and I'm seeing agreement on the YouTube stream with the contribution you have made. And just to advise as well, React as an organization has a youth arm that we fondly refer to as Junior React for persons that's under 18 as well. All right, so one more question from coming out of the YouTube stream. What about Simplex? Who would like to talk to us or let us know what Simplex is about and where does that fit in? What about Simplex is the question. Okay, so I think Alan wanted to speak. I don't know if it was in the previous question or the current question. Over to you, Alan. So just unmute as well, please.
It's unfortunate that those questions are coming one after the next, but I think it is good. The whole idea of I want to go back to the issue raised about the Caribbean response in amateur. So I'm not a radio amateur operator in any way, but because of my shared interest in the fraternities and also my bias as a disaster manager, being the recipient of the services and understand on a broader scale what is needed in the early stages of any humanitarian aid and in disaster response, it has become imperative for me to underscore the point that I think we have to give a little more to this process of allowing the fraternities of amateur radio enthusiasts to be readily available in the Caribbean to provide that service. And I will qualify my statement by saying this. One of the most important elements in the disaster management cycle, I always speak about the 4 C's: coordination, communications, and the whole aspect of allowing things to be comprehensive in nature is that of communications. It brings everything together. And communications, to me, when you put it into the aspect of humanitarian assistance in disaster risk, it's critically important that the readiness of that service and the availability for it to move into the theater of operations be as quick as possible. Communications is the first thing you want to know out of an affected country. And, I have gone over this many, many times, people plugging it into my ears. The entire CDMA construct allow for our NAT teams, meaning there is also the regional disaster response mechanism that will allow for these RNAT teams or a damage assessment and needs analysis teams to go in. There's also cost teams, those who provide services to the emergency operations center of an affected country. And the clinical important or the imperative in all of this is telecommunications. So I want to support the point that the societies across the region needs to find themselves in a position that they could be easily and quickly deployed. Somebody said to me once, if your technology cannot fit in the overhead hangar, it is not ready for disaster quick response or emergency response. And to me, we have to take that into consideration to speak about our readiness to provide services to our Caribbean neighbors when they are affected. Communication is the glue. Communication is the important element that is the first line of services that is needed to know exactly what is taking place in an affected territory in the region. So I really want to see Jeff and the group with that I can't remember the acronym, but it speaks to the Caribbean Union as it relates to radio amateur, providing that service to the community. So I leave the balance for the rest of the panel to speak about in terms of the value of Simplex communications. Thank you.
Sure, Alan Stewart, and very important contribution that you have made in the discussion as well. And I can see follow-on conversations taking place to address these issues that the panelists are raising and questions have been asked by our participants. So, all right, so in the interest of time, we'll just continue with this question on the floor and just to take a couple more that we have in queued, and then we will look to wrap up. So we do have a question on the floor that talks about what about Simplex. So I'm not sure if everyone in our audience knows what Simplex is. So probably just an explanation what is Simplex and maybe what it can be used for. So don't know who could take that and wrap that in like 2 minutes. So, and any of the panelists would like to take a stab at that one. What is Simplex? Or what about Simplex?
I will take it.
Sure, Tommy, over to you.
Right. So going back to the handy-talkie, the handheld two-way radio. Simplex, the term is normally used in the VHF and UHF frequencies where these radios have very short, fairly short range, right? And as opposed to Simplex, there's a term that is called, repeater, or sometimes called duplex. Although duplex is used in a different context with a different definition altogether, right? So in Simplex, one of these radios communicates with another one, right? So there's no other in-between device between the two radios. And the range is determined by the terrain, the power that you put out, and of course, because of the frequencies, there's a physical finite limit that you could transmit the distance because of that frequency, right? So, these Simplex and communications enthusiasts among us in the radio amateur community wants to test the limits, and that's what amateur radio is about. It's about testing the limits of things and see how far you could get your signal. So it is possible with the right type of equipment to do Simplex communications between us and another Caribbean island, like Grenada, Barbados, once the conditions are right, meaning you have enough power, you have clear line of sight, you have the right type of antennas, you could do Simplex communications. And in a case of disaster, knowing that that is possible through experimentation and keeping logs and over a period of time, you could almost be guaranteed that if you want to do a Simplex communications from here to Barbados at a particular time of the day or time of the year, that is just possible if the two parties have the same kind of equipment during the testing. So it's useful there, right? So that is where the enthusiast in amateur radio wants to, and Jeff said it earlier, where he said that the biggest limitation of modern communication in a disaster is the reliance on infrastructure. With Simplex communications, just like, well, you don't use the word Simplex with HF. HF is naturally Simplex. You do one radio at a time, right? There's no in-between infrastructure to deal with. So infrastructure, as Jeff said, is the main, one point of failure in modern communications, because without the cell towers, your cell phone just will not work. But if you have a two-way radio and you know how to maximize the distance coverage of your two-way radio, that could help in a particular situation. So back to you, moderator.
Excellent explanation indeed, Tommy, in terms of Simplex and comparing and contrasting for participants. So a couple of questions coming in again. First one is, are there any plans on the drawing board for additional repeaters to enhance React VHF radio transmission communications in Trinidad and Tobago? So I could take that question, and the answer, simple answer is yes, there are in fact plans to supplement additional repeater systems in Trinidad and Tobago. So very good question indeed. Right, and another question is, radio communication is very important. Is there any special training offered for two-way radio users so as to be better prepared for emergency situations? And so on. So I will attempt a little stab at it. So yes, amateur radio training is one component of that, but of course, even when you become a licensed amateur radio operator, there's still quite a lot to learn. It's kind of like your driver's permit. When you get your driver's license, you have just really started to drive. So there are courses that's available from many institutions. And from the React perspective, I can indicate that the organization React International has several courses available for persons to be able to take. And as a matter of fact, if there's anyone that's interested, right now as we speak, we are running an amateur radio course, and it's the general class. So there are courses available, and there are specialized courses. Sometimes they're available at conferences such as the IARU conferences, which will have emergency communications workshops, for example, and there are other such forum available. So the answer is yes, there are available opportunities. All right, and let's see if we have, okay, so there's a couple comments coming in via YouTube as well. A lot of kudos and so on being expressed. Good questions. Here's a question, and probably we could, oh, there's a comment here that says JOTA, that's Jamboree on the Air, is a way to introduce youngsters to ham radio. So very good point there, Sean. And here's a question. How can radio equipment be made more available and or affordable to all sectors of the population? So I'll say again that question. How can radio equipment be made more available and or affordable to all sectors of the population? Who would like to take that one?
I would just like to see that right above my head, there's a URL. 9y4.tt. That's a good way to start by getting the amateur radio license. And Robbie is doing our moderator is doing an awesome job with some training material. But one way to access the material, you must be a licensed radio operator. And to get that, there's a link right over my head, a URL to our website that you can certainly. There are two. If you need to join, there are two links for one link for licensed amateur radio operators and one for prospective operators. Click on the prospective operator. There's a form. We'll be contacting you, and we will be directing you to Robbie's courses. They're excellent programs, but like I said, John Public could only get a radio if he's licensed for it. And that license will come via amateur radio license, which the Amateur Radio Society will be very glad to assist you with. And Robbie is doing a good job with his training program.
Excellent indeed. Thanks very much, Dev Gosain. So I'll just go through one more question and we will look to wrap. So here's a question, and looking at the question, I think this is one I will have to ask Paula Marie Granado to give us a response on. The question goes like this. It says, React radio operators are the foot soldiers on the ground. Are they given the recognition and resources by the government After all, REACT is in the National Emergency Communications Plan. So Paula, can I ask you to take this one?
Sure, Mr. Moderator. Yes, certainly we are the foot operators on the ground, foot soldiers, I call them normally. I believe that more and more recognition is coming REACT's way as people understand what the organization is about. And in fact, I have experienced the disaster management units calling on reactors on a regular basis to assist them during times of disaster. And that would have started happening basically from 2011 in the Maraval floods, and then into 2012 in the Digger Martin floods. And I would have earlier made mention as I started this evening's conversation, and I would have alluded to the fact that in every aspect of the disaster cycle, radio communications plays its part. And that is where REACT began getting its recognition very strongly, because we were on the ground for a lot of what took place in 2011 and 2012. So to cut the long story short, officially, we have spoken to ODPM on several occasions. We have been in meetings with ODPM. We have actually been recognized by the Red Cross in their shelter management courses. They identify REACT as a source of communication. So yes, we are recognized, and I would suggest to, as you had said earlier, that reactors follow the training documents that are available to them through the REACT International website, and also participate in all training that is provided via the government or the disaster management unit as we go along into every year's rainy season, hurricane seasons.
Excellent response. Thank you very much, Paula Marie Granado. And the note about training, there are a lot of training that's available that became during the month of May, quite a lot facilitated by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, shelter management training, as you mentioned, and several others such as the CERT program. And sometimes the UDPM runs the damage assessment and needs analysis, or the initial damage assessment courses. So very well indeed. And I did say that was the last question, but there is a question here that I think I would like to take. We are a little bit on time, but this is a very relevant question. And the question goes like this. It says, what should we be doing now to encourage radio training and activities? So I say again, what should we be doing now to encourage radio training and activities? Who would like to take this one?
As the clock is ticking, I think I could jump in and say a couple.
Sure, Alan Stewart, over to you.
This is an opportune time for allowing for persons that are home very idle. The young people sometimes use the term bored. And radio communication, I was making the point earlier on another form of communication called Zello with one of my colleagues, Jeff, on this very platform. That this period allows radio communications and telecommunications to come to the fore, where in a pandemic where people are restricted, their movements are restricted. You may be in quarantine, you may be isolated, you may be part of a curfew, but your telecommunications device is not. And therefore, it's an opportunity to move the conversation to the young people, where they can, by way of some of these sessions via these modes, that could offer them very hands-on experience and broadening the spectrum and also the opportunity for persons to become as part of what you may consider the community emergency response teams. And I say that in a particular context. For us in Tobago, that is a profession by itself. But in the community, there are a number of persons who want to help, and they make themselves available for training in CERT as volunteers. And an important element of that leg of assistance to me is radio communications. So I think it's an opportunity for us to introduce. I have seen the appetite being whet by a huge number of persons who have joined through Zello. I saw one of the Zello channel when I looked at it sometime. It have over 1,000 and something persons who have been engaged by the very React members channel. The Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society have been a major contributor to all of this. So you are seeing people that are jumping in because they are now discovering that radio communication can be had through voice over internet protocol by way of Zello through their phones. But they know that there is something needs to be a better, more tangible, and the robustivity is really in the bedrock of the radio device itself. And they want to get their hands on it. And I think it's an opportunity for us to do so by sharing it with them. I'll close there in the interest of time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and thank you so much, Alan Stewart, for your take on it. Important points that you have made indeed. And I think Tommy Chen would also like to give a response. Over to you, Tommy Chen.
Yes, thanks, Robbie. I just want to highlight some of the things that the International Amateur Radio Union has been doing to address these issues, the issue of youth and the issue of emergency communications, two major issues that the IERU is focused on. And these areas are strategic because the radio operators of today were radio operators when they were very young and now serve a much more strategic and wider role, right? So the IERU has launched for several years now a youth program, and it's very successful in Region 1. Region 1 is the world is divided up into 3 regions, and Region 1 is is Africa and Europe. That is Region 1, and Region 1 has a very, very strong youth coordination program. If you go to the IERU website, you'll see that Region 1 has multiple youth coordinators throughout all of the countries and territories within Region 1. Region 1 is a very, very diverse region. Region 2, the Americas, recently appointed N0SSC, that is call sign, as youth coordinator for this entire region, right? So, and one of the things he wants is volunteers from individuals throughout the Americas to meet up with him and to be able to be a local contact for youth activities. So if you search on Google for N0SSC, you'll see he has a blog. He's an active blogger and he does a lot of YouTube videos, right? And a lot of podcasts. And he has lots of activities that is directed towards youth involvement in amateur radio. So that is one thing I wanted everyone to be aware of. Secondly, in terms of emergency communications, the IERU sees emergency communications as one of the biggest contribution that amateur radio brings in terms of public service. And that is why it spends so much energy and effort. And there are many case studies of member societies and other radio amateur clubs throughout this region that have posted case studies at the IERU R2 websites, and you could go there and look at them because there are disasters of every type. Remember the mining incident in Chile, multiple hurricanes in Central America and then throughout the Caribbean and the northern part of the Caribbean, right? And also the natural disasters in North America, in Mexico, Canada, and the US. And you could see these stories being published by their local societies, but also by the IARU. And one member society, the biggest one in the Americas, the Amateur Radio Relay League, the ARRL, is a treasure trove of information and training on radio techniques, on radio training, emergency communications, and message handling that is done in emergency communications. Visit those websites, and it's a very good starting point for starting your learning and becoming more proficient. And remember that once you are amateur radio, you are supposed to be able to self-study and self-learn. And part of that is doing the research and finding people who could help you along your journey in trying to become expert in a particular area. So that's it. Back to you, Robbie.
Excellent and comprehensive response also there, Tommy Chen, to the question. And we keep getting a lot of questions. We'll have to close off on the questions. However, based on some of these here, just quickly, is there any developments in formulating a national disaster communication plan? In fact, yes, panelists did speak about it earlier, that there is something called the NECP in Trinidad and Tobago. It's the National Emergency Communications Plan, and it has been revised and developed. Several of the stakeholders around the table today have in fact participated, TITAS, WASA, TIMA, Udpm, React, and so on. So yes, that should be published very shortly. And also a comment coming in via the stream on YouTube, a question about Citizens Band Radio. There is also CB Radio, which is now legal in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is quite correct as of 2 years ago. All right, so good point indeed. CB Radio can be purchased, imported and so on in Trinidad and Tobago, courtesy of the Telecom Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, having the Citizen Band Radio authorization framework in place. So folks, that is where we must put an end the questions for now. They're still coming in fast and furious. If we were to take all these questions, I think we'll keep our panelists well into tomorrow. What it just means is, as we have said before, we will be having follow-up sessions. That's the intention. It will form conversations, and we'll create the platforms for us to come together and interact, collaborate, cooperate, and discuss communications that's relevant in such a forum. So at this time, I would just like to quickly ask each of the panelists for any closing remark, very brief closing statement that you may have, and I will go in the order of the initial presentation. So I'll ask, first of all, Paula Marie Granado, any closing comments?
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Moderator. Wonderful experience this evening, listening to everybody, not just the panelists. Of course, the panelists were very brilliant. And the questions coming forward were also very brilliant and shows that people are paying attention. It was a pleasure to be a part of the conversation this afternoon, and we look forward to, continued conversations as we move forward. As Alan would have said, this is a brilliant time for us to do these things. We are locked down. We can't go anywhere. Let's spend the time talking. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Paula Marie Granado, and for your contribution as well. And some comments that's coming in via YouTube that it says, in a disaster, it matters not what organization one belongs to, just get the message through, and very well said. And other comments, we are all in the same boat, indeed. So very good sentiments being expressed. And we have, a big up from Massachusetts and quite a number of persons from the US as well, tuning into us. Cayman Islands in the house. Okay, so next up, I will ask the next person, Alan Stewart, for your closing remarks. Over to you.
Firstly, Mr. Chair, I want to thank my distinguished colleagues who form part of this August body. for their submission throughout this exercise this evening. More importantly is those persons who ask a range of questions that really challenge the mind and the ability to convey sentiments and to allow fluidly the discussions to take place. I will use this opportunity as I close by citing an area that we did not speak to, and is that of infrastructure. I want to close by saying, in all of this, robustivity plays a very important role. And I know the 90% of the persons who are involved here are coming out of NGOs, which provide voluntary services. And throughout the Caribbean, it has been a challenge where the infrastructure that support telecommunications are sometimes left to ruins is the word that is coming, but I don't think it is very politically correct for me to use that word in this forum. But more so, if I were to come close to it, I will want to say that is something, colleagues, that needs urgent attention. Our infrastructure that support telecommunications throughout the region are aging, and therefore we have to send a signal to the authorities that in order for it to be sustainable during the many crises and especially hydrometeorological events, it's important that we strengthen these infrastructure. Otherwise, they are going to fail. And it's a period of time that we are going through where we are seeing these infrastructure are going through a perilous time because of lack of maintenance that is needed. Thank you very much. And to everyone, have yourself a pleasant night. It was indeed a pleasure sharing this platform.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alan Stewart, and for your contribution as well. So we have a comment on the YouTube stream about the International Amateur Radio Permit, the IARP. So point noted that such a device or tool or document exists, the International Amateur Radio Permit, IARP. Okay, so up next for closing remarks, we invite Rennie King. Over to you.
Well, it has been a pleasure being part of this program this afternoon, or should I say this evening, or tonight. It was very informative, and I won't mind taking part again in future programs of this nature, where we could inform others and enlighten them more about the use of amateur radio during emergency, the use of it, and so forth, and helping others to understand what we do more. Because most people hear amateur operators, but they don't know exactly what we do. They don't know what is entailed, the equipment that is used, and so forth. So let's hope we can have more of these programs where we can enlighten the general public. Here in St. Vincent, there's an urgent need for a repeater system to put into place, VHF, UHF, and I actually started a GoFund campaign towards this, and I'm hoping that I will actually muster up enough funds where I can actually get some repeaters on the mainland itself here in St. Vincent, where we can use these repeater to function in the event of emergency, to pass emergency communication to and from the affected areas. Also, I will end by saying, when all fail, there is amateur. So I'll end with that statement. When all fail, there's amateur.
Excellent indeed, Rennie King, for your contribution, and really appreciate it as well. Very important end note, and certainly we support you in that effort towards outfitting SVG with that capability as well. So certainly you have our full support. All right, so up next, I will ask for your closing comment. Dexter Harrow, over to you, sir.
Okay, just want to say it was a pleasure sitting in here and listening to all the information that was passed was very informative. And I too would enjoy taking part in further sessions where I could get into detail in about some of the modes and protocols that we use and that I personally have worked on and set up for to help forge the emergency communications locally, mainly the WinLink system, which is a very important system that is linked globally for the said purpose. So again, thanks for having me, and I look forward to getting into detail of some of the stuff that we have been doing. And I wouldn't mind sitting in on something for the youths, getting them involved, showing them how we communicate, not just as a hobby, but for emergency purposes and all of that. So thanks again, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dexter Haru, for your contribution as well. Important indeed, especially I like your focus on the youth. Yes, indeed. All right, so we now invite for closing comments, Tommy Chen, over to you.
Again, I would like to thank you, Robbie, and the panelists for sharing our collective 200 plus years of expertise, and our expertise as well as in amateur radio. I really enjoyed this session, and really enjoyed being part of this team of persons who have contributed to the country. Some of us has been here from the very beginning, and could see how emergency response and the evolution of the agencies within Trinidad and Tobago to respond to emergency and disasters. And I really honored to be part of this group here that is in sharing their knowledge with the community out there. And I also will be available for any other sessions that you want to get into. And also, I'm going to put on my IERU hat here, and that the IERU is the is our International Amateur Radio Union that protects the amateur radio service, right? So all these wide range of frequencies that we have as amateur radio operators came at a price. It came at a price of, at the very beginning, at the start of the beginning of the ITU, when the world was going to regulate and commercialize all frequencies in the world. These group of experimenters came together and showed that you need to reserve space for experimentation and for training and for people to learn, right? And use things that was not commercially viable, but eventually did. So this particular device, the smartphone, was a result of amateur radio use and perfection, and that went into industry. So again, thank you, Robbie, and thanks to our audience out there for their very probing questions and very relevant questions. Thank you.
Excellent indeed, Tommy Chen. And I guess collectively, this is a bit of a think tank that we have here together, lots of ideas, lots of experience. And indeed, I liked how you mentioned the importance of the IARU. A lot of people are not aware of the purpose of IARU, and that's one of the things that we could do going forward in terms of evangelizing and letting people know about the importance of the International Amateur Radio Union. Okay, so up next for closing comments, we invite Jeff Chandler.
Thanks very much, Mr. Goswami, for having me on this evening's show. I would like to thank those who are on YouTube with your questions and so on. But the Canadian government a few years ago invited myself and another ham to participate in a study, a pilot study in 2 countries, in St. Lucia and in Antigua, with respect to the WinLink operations at that time. And of course, we made a presentation in the Crown Plaza Hotel in Port of Spain. I think it's now called the Radisson, where when we made the presentation, it was approved, and stations were supposed to be provided to all the CARICOM participating states. And lo and behold, Tommy is saying that they actually started with Dominica and I think Jamaica receiving, and I suppose Trinidad is going to receive in the not too distant future. But it is indeed bulletproof. It has been tested and proven, and it works. I think there's no longer the need for that expensive modem. You can now use it using a laptop. So I'd like to say I'd be available to participate in the part 2 of this session. And of course, thanks to all my colleagues on the panel.
Okay, excellent indeed. Thanks very much there, Jeff Chandler. Very important point that you're making in terms of the WinLink system, and that you don't need to use Pactor 4 modems necessarily anymore. You have the VARA HF, and I know Dexter has been working on the 2 meters with VARA FM and so on. So very good collaboration, and based on what Tommy has said as well, we are seeing some progress. And I think to borrow a term from my good friend Mark, I'm seeing here, I'm looking at the screen, and I think we have some heavyweights, not necessarily in terms of physical weight, but in terms of just the compendium, the encyclopedia of information that we have here this evening. And let's now call upon David Drakes for your closing comments, please. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I want to say it was a pleasure being here with my colleagues. I have learned quite a bit from the interaction here this evening. I would not want to be presumptuous, but should I be invited to any future events, I would be more than willing to assist. I've listened to my colleagues, especially Director Stewart from TIMA, and my colleague Rennie from St. Vincent, particularly as it relates to infrastructure and either the lack thereof or the maintenance of, or maybe a combination of both. Speaking on behalf of my own organization, WASA, we have been able to put at the disposal of the amateur radio community 1 repeater in the VHF spectrum, and we hope. We've just received approval from the Telecommunications Authority for a secondary repeater, which I will say more about at a later stage. But that is my organization's attempt to build some resilience as it relates around the infrastructure that we are speaking about. I heard Tommy in particular make mention of WinLink, and so did Jeff. It's one of the platforms we too have been experimenting with over the last several weeks and or months. So we have been able to, on HF, for example, make contact with some of those WinLink stations in San Jose, in Santo Domingo and in Panama City. And hopefully we should see some of those Winlink gateway stations a little closer to home in the not too distant future. So in closing, I would just like to say we are doing what we can in terms of assisting with infrastructure. And I do look forward to the continued collaboration among all our stakeholders. We see WASA as being an integral component, not necessarily fundamentally in a telecommunications perspective, but certainly as it relates to disaster management. So I thank you for the opportunity to have been here this evening.
Excellent contribution indeed, David Drakes, and we certainly welcome that contribution that you and WASA are making towards sustainability, resilience, in terms of amateur radio infrastructure, so that we are able to, if God forbids, the day does come, it's needed, that capacity is available to be able to respond. Okay, so again, by no means least, but certainly the last of our panelists that we will ask for closing remarks, Mr. Dev Gosain, over to you.
Okay there, Robbie. Let me first thank you for picking me to be at this evening's program. It was certainly very enjoyable. I'd like to thank my esteemed colleagues on this panel. I mean, I think you had a real powerhouse here. Not very talk about that, talk about the rest of the guys here. Really, really great. I want to thank the audience. I mean, they were very participatory and some excellent questions, very thought-provoking. And, one of the comments earlier on say that, about, working together, and I totally agree with that. This is why the model that we had in San Fernando there, there's a very close collaboration between amateur radio operators and CB operators, and we had to learn from each other and that sort of stuff. All strata of radio operators must be cohesive. That is a definite mandatory thing that must happen if we really want to move forward in this venture. And one of the things about attracting youth, I think you have started it, Robbie, tonight. Discussion like this is what the youth will want to hear. I want to be able to, and I'm glad it's going to be recorded, so they can have time shifting communication. They can see it, view it at their own convenience, and see what they have missed, and so on. I would, and I think that we have to keep these discussions coming. And I would like to say that I'm like a West Indian cricketer. I'm fit, available for selection in any format of the sport. So I'm going to end by quoting a very good friend of mine. That's Arnold Griffith, 9Y4NG. He always says when he ends a conversation, be good and be safe. But if you can't be good, be safe. Stay safe, everyone. Be blessed and good night.
Thank you very much, Dev Gosain. Excellent contribution indeed, and spoken as a true all-rounder, if we were to use another cricketing term. All right, very important points that you have made there. So I think, panel, we have come to the end, and it just leaves me one final duty, and that is to make some closing remarks. And I would just like to say, in closing, we would like to thank the Udpm and the React Trinidad and Tobago Council for conceptualizing and putting this program together for us. Special thanks to the CEO of the Udpm, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, and Operations Manager Dennis Marcel, and the Udpm's support staff, without whose contribution and input this would certainly have not been possible. Certainly a lot of work went into planning. Certainly like to thank all of the panelists, Paula Marie Granado, Alan Stewart, Rennie King, Dexter Haru, Tommy Chen, Jeff Chandler, David Drakes, and Dev Gosain. Thanks to the participants who were part of the live audience and those that fielded questions. What lovely questions they were, very poignant, very pertinent questions overwhelming response and questions and comments. We really appreciate you. Without your participation also, this would not have been possible. So we're saying that look out for follow-up sessions in the near future. So of course, anyone would like to make contact with React, the number will be 1-868-74-REACT. You can WhatsApp, you can text, you can call. And of course, if you would like to find out any more about React, just Google React International and you will get websites, web pages, social media platforms, and we can provide further information as well. Dev Gosain also reminded us of the link 9y4.tt for the Trinidad and Tobago Amateur Radio Society. We encourage you to visit that website and check it out. And persons in the audience, maybe we have moved you to think about getting involved, becoming a volunteer, maybe becoming a licensed amateur radio operator. And if so, just reach out to the number provided earlier and we will put you in touch, or go to the website and you'll get the relevant information. So we are hoping that this have inspired persons. We hope that the conversation was one that is really a starting point, not an end, and that we move forward, going forward in a very cooperative and collaborative way. So I would like to wish that each and every one and their family be safe, continue being safe. Do have a good night. All the best.